Hello everyone. Hope you can all see me okay. Hi, welcome to Touch Tank Tuesday. My name is Olivia and I am the public education lead at the Deep Bay Marine Field Station. Now, we are an education and research facility that is part of Vancouver Island University. And what that means is that we help to educate the community, but we also do a ton of research here on shellfish aquaculture, and our local marine environment. So there really is quite a wide variety of what we do here. Today, I have another special critter for you. And this is one that you've seen before, but we're going to take a different view at what we're looking at. So if you can guess, you can see it right up here, very, very close to it. I will zoom out. We will be fiddling around with the zoom of the camera a bit today. So let me zoom out for you. This, if anyone can guess, this is a sea star, and this is an ochre sea star. But today we are going to be talking about sea stars, but we're also going to be talking about research. So we're going to be talking about hi, Lisa. Welcome. So we're going to be talking about sea stars and sea star wasting disease, how people look for and study sea star wasting disease, and some of the cool citizen science programs that we run, as well as some of the other organizations run in the area here around Vancouver Island. So if you have any questions, please pop them into the comments section. I will try to answer them as we go. If I can't answer them, maybe I don't know the answer or I don't see it, I will come back and comment afterwards to try and answer it for you. So I'm going to start just talking about sea stars. We're going to be reviewing, if you've seen us previously talk about them, we've had 2 other sessions about sea stars. I'm going to review what a sea star is, where it lives. I'm going to talk about this species. Ooh, hi, Sandy. I'm going to talk about this species here. And then we'll talk about sea star wasting disease and kind of how scientists survey for it, and also some of the citizen science programs that are being done. So let's get started. This is the ochre sea star. I'm going to zoom on in here for you. I will disappear for a moment. But so this is an ochre sea star. This sea star is a little bit smaller than maybe the ones we've seen previously because it is a juvenile. And we will talk a little bit about that. I think this one's a juvenile. We will check to make sure when we are looking at the different things that we have to measure when we are researching sea stars. So this sea stars are in the phylum Echinodermata. I will go back here. So remember, that's that big group, Echinodermata. So they're echinoderms, and echinoderms are spiky skinned. So they're spiky skinned invertebrates. So you can see even with this sea star here that when we touch it, this one's actually quite rough. So this is very spiky. And the rough parts are actually ossicles. So they're these tiny little, almost like bones that are made out of a shell material, which we'll talk about in a minute. And so Echinodermata, remember, it has those sea urchins, it has sand dollars, sea stars, and it has sea cucumbers in it, amongst other things. But this is a big group. And then sea stars, or anything that we call a sea star, is in that smaller group or class, and we call them asteroids. And there are 1,500 different species. Here in the Pacific Northwest, I think we have about 20 or more species here. Some of the most common ones that you will find here in Deep Bay are this one, the ochre star. This is the most common I've seen. We also have sunflower stars, mottled stars, the vermilion star, and spiny pink stars. And leather stars, which I will show you today. So there are lots of different ones, and they actually live at different areas in the intertidal and subtidal zone. So this species right here, the Ochre Sea Star, you can find in the intertidal zone, but pretty low. And remember, that intertidal zone is that area where the water covers and uncovers throughout the day because of the tides. And so basically, the only time you will find these stars out here in Deep Bay is at very, very low tides. And if you look at a tide chart, that would be maybe about 1 meter is a very low tide. but we have really a wide range, a couple meters usually sometimes. So when it's 1 meter or under, I can usually find an ochre sea star out in the intertidal zone. I have not seen any leather stars, but maybe that's because they live in different areas or more subtidally. And sea stars have tube feet. So you could kind of see this sea star is making a run for it. I'm going to make it pretty big here for you, and I will actually move our sea star so that you can see it. So this sea star is running fast. And the way it moves is with its tube feet. So it has these tiny little feet, and we'll zoom in so that you can see them. And they're easiest to see at the end of their arms. Right here. Oh, there you go. That's perfect. So you can see all those tiny little, they look like little strings. Those are tube feet. And what they do is they act as tiny little suction cups. They move their feet and suction to the surface of rocks or really anything that they can attach to. And they will walk with them. They have 2 rows on each of their arms of tube feet. So there's 2 long rows that go from the central disc, so the center of them, all the way to the edge of the arm. And you can see this one's moving really fast. It is escaping us. I don't know how fast the ochre sea star moves, but the leather sea star, when it is running from, let's say, a sunflower star because it's scared and trying not to get eaten, it will move at about 15 centimeters per minute. It kind of looks like this one's moving a bit faster than that. So you can see all those tiny little tube feet. And the reason they're able to do this is because they have something called a water vascular system. Now, the water vascular system is kind of how it sounds. It's basically this pressure system of water in their bodies that allows them to create suction. And they're able to regulate that through something called a Madraporite, which is right here. So it's this tiny little, and I'm going to fool around with this camera a little bit more so that you can see it. The Madraporite is just this tiny little valve that looks like a spot. So it's that light colored spot in the center there. You'll see it. It's kind of an orange color. That's the Madraporite, and it's kind of like a valve. And so it lets in and out water to regulate the pressure on the inside of the sea star, and it helps it move its feet, which is really, really cool. But the sea star basically has this central disc. So in the center, around the central disc, you have its nervous system. So that's basically where it's sending and receiving signals. And then it radiates out in these 5 arms. And so if you remember from those sea urchins, the sea cucumbers we talked about, all of these echinoderms have this pentaradial, so 5 penta radial symmetry. So it has symmetry in 5 ways. And these arms, on the edges of them, so kind of where we were looking before, there is one dot there, and it's a eye spot. And so they have one on each of the ends of their arms, and that allows them to sense their environment. The eye spot is photoreceptive, so it can see the changes in light. So it probably is running away from me here because it can see the change in light. It's actually leaving our screen right now. And for the sea stars, I will attempt to move this around. There we go. And so this sea star is, I can move it upside down. So you can see all of these tube feet. So we have those rows. So 2 rows on each one of these arms. And right at the center is its mouth. We can't really see it right now. And what sea stars do is they eat clams and they eat other types of shellfish. And they will use their stomach. So they might push their stomach out to engulf their prey. Oh, you can see its legs, its tube feet are coming out there. And I'll put it back underwater. It'll either engulf its prey with its stomach and start to digest it, or if it, in the case of a shellfish, it might use its tube feet. So it's very, very strong and suctioned. It'll use its tube feet to actually pull apart the shell, and then it'll insert its stomach into the shellfish, and it will start to digest and eat that way. So it is really cool, and they are amazing predators. Let me just do this. Yeah, so you can see it now. So they are amazing predators. And so this species specifically, the ochre flower star as well, they are something called keystone species. And a keystone species, I love sea stars as well. Hi, Jem. A keystone species is basically a species that shapes the world around it. So this species here, so the ochre sea star, if it was in one location, it shapes everything around it because of its behavior. But if it was taken away, then that environment would completely change. So with this keystone species, the reason it is a keystone species is because it sees the world as its buffet. So it will eat anything it can. So the ochre sea star will eat, let's say, mussel beds. So they will eat mussels. They will decimate mussel beds. And what happens basically, so when mussels grow, they grow in these huge beds and they take over the entire environment. So if we have ochre stars, those stars will come in, they'll eat those mussels. And when they finish eating those mussels, all of the other species can come and live there. So they keep the mussels under control, and that allows all of the other species, other invertebrates to come and live there. So they increase diversity, they increase richness by helping to create environment and habitat for other species. So they're really, really important at making sure that our intertidal zone isn't completely filled with mussels. Yeah, so so Sandy is talking about dried starfish that she found on the beach in Florida as a kid. So yes, I don't have my dried sea star with me right now, but I do have one that is dried. And so yeah, it's the same species. So scientists decided to kind of rename them or rebrand the sea stars. So starfish would be maybe what you called them before. Now we're calling them sea stars. The one you found might have been a different species than this, because I think the ochre sea star ranges from Alaska all the way down to about California, just on the Pacific coast. Yeah. Oh, hi, welcome. So just on the Pacific coast there. So you might have found a different sea star species actually, but they can dry up, and that's because they have, it's really important that they stay wet, otherwise you'll kind of see more of their test. And so this is a sea urchin's test. It's made out of calcium carbonate. For sea stars, they also have a test made out of the same calcium carbonate, but it is made of tiny ossicles. So they're like these tiny little calcium carbonate bones that attach together. And so they kind of join and allow bending and movement of the sea star, which is running away on us again. There it is. So it allows them to have these very flexible arms because they have these more tiny joint bones, instead of what you can see, this fused test instead of the sea urchin. So it's really cool. You can really see those tiny ossicles when you have the dried sea star as well. And the reason why scientists tried to rebrand starfish as sea stars is because they're not fish. So we're kind of giving the wrong impression for everyone who is looking at sea stars, thinking that they were a type of fish, but they're quite different. They're invertebrates. They're very unique in the way that they are, but they're definitely not swimming around, and they're not vertebrates. So that's why they kind of changed it. But that's everything really about sea stars, other than maybe their reproduction. So the way these sea stars reproduce is sexually. So they will develop eggs, and they'll develop sperm, and they will broadcast spawn. So they'll throw those sperm into the water column, the eggs into the water column. They will meet and then fertilize. Hi, you're welcome. They'll meet and fertilize and turn into kind of a free-floating larvae. That larvae will settle onto the bottom. They'll go through a couple different phases to turn into that 5 symmetry, because they would start 2, and then they would divide and kind of go through metamorphosis. And then they will settle and grow to look like a sea star into young ones, juveniles, and then adults. So that's kind of their process. Sea stars are also able to do something called fragmentation and regeneration. So what might happen is maybe a seagull will grab the sea star, it'll pull on its leg, and the sea star might actually just let its leg go. So it would let its leg be taken off. And by doing that, it gives it the opportunity to run away from the predator. And then it is able to regenerate that limb. So it actually grow a leg back, which is quite amazing. It's only able to do this as if it has a piece of its central disc. So remember that area, the disc in the center that has its nervous system in it. So if it still has that, what would happen is that that leg would then turn into another sea star. So let's say it was broken off by accident, maybe a rock hit it and it broke off, maybe it would grow into a new sea star. The problem with that is that sometimes when this happens, it leaves them to be very susceptible to disease. Bacteria might get in. If there's changes in water temperature, maybe they're more likely to die. So for these sea stars, they don't choose to reproduce this way. But there are some species that are in more tropical areas that is actually their main form of reproduction. So they'll actually, that's what they'll do. They'll reproduce by taking their arm off, so one of their rays around, and then growing a new sea star. It's absolutely amazing that they're able to do that. And so with this sea star, they choose not to do that though because of the environment. And also they have a lot of food, so they don't need to put all that, so they can put all the energy into reproducing sexually instead of asexually. So it's quite interesting how different they are. I also have this one right here. So this is a leather star. It's a juvenile, it is so tiny. I will pick it up here for you to see. So this is a leather star. There we go. So the leather star is quite amazing. It is very slimy relative to the Ochre Sea Star. And it has that Madraporite. It's a little bit more obvious. And although this is not a keystone species, it is a pretty important species. I think they all are, and they help with our ecosystem. They help make the world go around, really. And you can see it has the tube feet that radiate out. I just thought this was absolutely adorable. I found it in our tanks and did not expect to find it there. So it must have been hiding between some of the rocks. So that is this one. Okay, so let's talk about sea star wasting disease. So we've talked about how important the Ochre Sea Star is. Well, something happened to actually threaten the sea stars. In 2013, 2014, there was this huge event that happened where we had all of these sea stars dying off. We call this a mortality event. So we have all of this huge amount of deaths all down the coast. And that's really concerning because of how big it was. Yeah, very good. Well, not great, but Jim is just mentioning, yes, the sea star wasting disease. Very good. Is it still occurring? So yes, it is still occurring. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So really great, Jim. So sea star wasting disease, this huge mortality event started in 2013, 2014. So we had all of these deaths happen, and it happened very, very rapidly. So these sea stars would suddenly be dying, they'd be disintegrating, and their arms would be falling off. It was really, really not good. So that suddenly started to happen in 2013, 2014, and it's actually continuing until this day. But we have had these huge die-offs before. So something like, I think it was the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, there would also be die-offs. So we're not sure if this is just a extreme version of what has happened kind of cyclically in the past, or if this is really something new that's happening. And so this has started happening. It's called sea star wasting disease. It's also called sea star wasting syndrome because scientists don't really know why it happened. So that's one thing that scientists aren't quite sure about, is why these sea stars are dying. They're exploring maybe a virus, some type of pathogen. It could be an environmental factor. There's so many different things that it could be. But what's really important is that they're monitoring to see where it's happening and kind of the spread of it. But because this is so huge, it needs something called citizen science. So if any of you have heard of citizen science, it's basically where citizens, regular citizens like you and I, go out and help collect data for a research project. And so that's something that's happening now in collaboration. I think it's Marine. It's the organization, I think they're in Washington, that are working on collecting data, collecting information on where sea star wasting disease is happening. So if they can figure out what's happening with all the different populations along the coast and compiling all that information, then maybe we can understand whether the populations are recovering, which we really hope, whether sea star wasting disease is becoming worse, maybe we're having higher die-offs. So they're using something called citizen science, and it's a citizen science stewardship program. So to be able to bring citizens in to collect data over large areas, because something that's really hard with science research projects is having the people, the funding, and the time. So with something so big, it's really great that regular citizens are going out and collecting information, giving it to Marine, and they're actually able to create a map. So you could check out their website. They have a really good map on there that kind of shows where sea star wasting disease has been recorded. But what's really important is that everyone who goes out to collect data, it does it all the same, because it's really important that everyone is collecting data in the same way, so that the data is kind of consistent. So it's the same. So we're going to just talk a little bit about how scientists and citizens are collecting data. And I definitely encourage anyone who's interested, Strawberry Isle, Marine Research. They have a Facebook page, which I will post afterwards. They're actually doing a workshop just on this, amazing timing, on this tomorrow if anyone's interested. And they are basically telling the methods, and they have someone coming out from Marine to sort of share the methods of research, so that if you were interested in collecting this data, if anyone's near the ocean, if you were interested in doing it, you'd be able to go and do it, which is awesome. We also do that here, but we bring school field trips out, and they're actually out on our beach lease collecting data on sea star wasting disease. And we did that actually last week with a group of grade 11s, and we were amazed to see all of our sea stars are very healthy on our beach lease. So that's pretty fantastic. But basically what happens is that you would go out into the intertidal zone and usually use something called a quadrat. So this is a quadrat. You can kind of see it here. It's basically a big square. And this big square is our sampling area. So we don't have enough time to go out to the beach and basically collect information on all the sea stars across the whole beach. So what you would use would be a quadrat to create a small beach within a beach. And that's kind of how scientists and citizens are able to collect data in a uniform area. And so this quadrat would be where you would collect all of your information, and you can replicate it across the beach. So for Marine, you would need a plot usually that stays in the same place. So that way the sea stars might come onto it or go from it, but each time you're sampling the same area. And what they would do is basically take a health score. So you would decide, if you found a sea star, one, is it healthy? Does it have a mild case of sea star wasting disease, or is it severe? So does it have a severe case of sea star wasting disease? And you would also measure the sea star to see what size it is. So a severe case of sea star wasting disease is basically you would see the sea star like this, but it would be missing maybe 2 of its arms. Maybe it would have big white lesions on it. And a lot of the time they end up twisting their arms. So their arms end up twisting. And so they look very, very, very sad. So that's a very serious case. A mild case would actually be maybe just 1 arm that's missing, 1 small lesion maybe. So it's just a little bit of evidence of wasting or sea star wasting. And then a healthy sea star would be what you are looking at right now. So these are healthy sea stars. This is the ochre and the leather sea star. They are healthy. This is what we want to see in a sea star. And so if you were a scientist or a citizen going out there to collect data, you would want to measure your sea star. And I'll just do that here. They take measurements from the center, so the central disk, right there, all the way to the end of the arm, but without touching the sea star. And that's just to make sure that we're not maybe causing bacteria or what's causing sea star wasting disease, if it's a pathogen or anything. We don't want to introduce it into the population if it's healthy. So I think sometimes it's a bit of a guess. So this would actually be about 10 centimeters. So we're looking at 100 millimeters and that's their radius. So just from the center to the edge of the arm. And that's how you do a size class. So this sea star right here is an adult. So it is an adult sea star, not a juvenile, since we talked about that before. And then we could do the same one with the leather star, which is not as impacted as the ochre star. So this one is 4 centimeters. So that is 40 millimeters. So I think that one's just beginning to be an adult. So it's on the edge of being an adult or a juvenile, but it is so small. So these are the kind of things that they would collect. Then they would score them, whether it's healthy, mild, or severe, and then contribute that data to Marine for their project and the map that they have there. And I'm just checking. So Jim has asked, do Vancouver Island coast sea stars frequent certain depths? I tend to see them myself around boat piers, but not on Parksville Beach. Okay, yeah, so Jim was asking about where they kind of live in the intertidal zone. And so yes, it depends on the species, but it also depends on the substrate. So you are saying that you see them around boat piers. And so that's a hard substrate. So because they have these tiny little tube feet that help them to walk around, they actually prefer more of a rocky area. So especially the ochre star, whenever I do go out into Deep Bay, they will be around maybe some cinder blocks that are out in the intertidal zone, and they'll actually be holding on to large rocks. So you wouldn't really see them in the sandy beach areas, and that's just because they don't like to walk on sand. You can imagine the sand getting stuck to their tube feet, so they don't really frequent those areas. They tend to be in more rocky areas. So that would probably be why. So if you have boat piers, if you have any large items that are in the intertidal zone that you can go to, you might actually find them in and around there. Yeah. It's a really great question. Okay, so that's basically everything you need to know generally about sea star wasting disease. And so people will go out and collect this information, and that is so that we can monitor the populations. And like we talked about earlier, ochre sea stars are keystone species, so they are really important to our marine environments. They are health indicators. They show a healthy intertidal zone. And so if we were to not have those ochre stars, so if they started to die off and we didn't have even just a couple in an area, if the population started to die, then we would have these huge shifts. So population shifts would occur. So maybe we would have an overgrowth of mussels, and it would just be a mussel bed. And what would happen would be that other species would not be able to grow and live there. So that's why they're really important. And so ochre, as well as sunflower stars, are very, very much so impacted by sea star wasting disease, sea star wasting syndrome. And so that's why it's really important that we study it. And it's really important that citizens are helping to collect that data, just because it's so widespread. Does anyone have any questions before we finish? I think we had some great questions so far. I think you can see them crawling away very fast. Sea stars tend to live, for the ochre sea star, minimum age naturally is 4 years, and they can live up to, I think it was up to 20. Yeah, very good. Yeah, you're right. So Lisa, that is something. So whenever we're going out and doing intertidal surveys, so that's when we're surveying species in that intertidal zone. So whenever we're going out there, we have to check the tides and make sure that it's going to be low tide when we're going out, because we're really only going to see these ochre stars at like 1 meter or lower tides. So last week it was about 0.9 meters off of Denman Island. So, and that was a pretty good tide level. Any places that use the sea star as a food source? I don't think we humans eat sea stars, probably because I don't think there's a lot of muscle there for us to eat. So I don't know if anyone actually eats them, but I do know that they have a couple predators, at least for the ochre star. They don't have many predators. One of them is the sea otter. Apparently sea otters eat ochre sea stars. Sunflower stars will eat pretty much any other star as well. They are a pretty scary predator. So they would eat them as well. But I don't know if there are any people who eat them. I personally wouldn't try them. But that's a great question. Yeah. Any more questions about our sea star guest today? You can see it's bending up. So it's trying to figure out if there's something else that it can attach its tube feet to. There. Okay. Well, if there aren't any more questions, this was fantastic. Thank you all for joining us today. And hopefully I will see you next week for Touch Tank Tuesday. I will post about it. We have been quite busy with school groups coming in. School groups tend to come in this month as well as next month. But then the school season is finished and we should be able to continue our Tuesdays a little bit more regularly. Okay, Lisa's asked, since we are monitoring in Deep Bay, would they want more monitoring in the Bowser area? I'm not sure. So what's really great is if you go to that website, and what I'll do is I'll post that after in response to your question. If you go to the Marine website, and it's Marine with the lowercase e, if you go to their website, they have a map, and that shows you all of the areas that are being plotted or being surveyed. And so those areas that are being surveyed, you could try and find a different area. I think they pretty much welcome information from all of the coast as long as it kind of aligns with what they're doing. And you can also contact them. Like I said, Strawberry Isle Marine is doing a workshop tomorrow that is kind of going over the methods. So you can always contact them for that. Thank you. Okay, well, fantastic. I will hopefully talk to you next week. Take care. Thank you. Bye.